This episode of the EDM Prodcast is brought to you by EDM Foundations. If you're a new producer and you're stuck with tutorials and you're not sure where to go, EDM Foundations might be the answer. We've had over 4,800 producers join and level up their foundational skills by practically making 4 pro-level tracks rather than learning a bunch of theory and concept. So if you want to stop wasting time and nail your music, head to edmprod.com/EDM-foundations. That's edmprod.com/EDM-foundations. All right, everyone, welcome to the EDM Prodcast. This is a show where we interview artists, producers, and anyone in the industry of electronic music production. Now, my name's Aden Russell, aka Artsea. I am the host here. And today we are joined by Anki, who actually is on the podcast for the second time. If you aren't familiar with Anki, he is a producer based out of Bristol. You're still in Bristol, right, man?
I am still in Bristol, absolutely.
Awesome. Yes, and you are known for your emotional melodic take on electronic music, fusing elements of pop and rock into your energetic context. You had releases on Enhanced, Dim Mak, Seeking Blue, just to name a few. And as of this episode coming out, your new album, To Be Heard, has released. That's a little bit about you, man. How are you? How's things?
I'm good, man. I am very good. As we were speaking about, I'm going to apologize for my audio up front. I've been on a stag do and my throat is ruined. It's a nightmare.
Don't worry, man.
It's too much. Yeah, I'm good, man. I'm good. I'm in that kind of post-album glow of like, I've been listening to the same 10 songs for about 2 years, and I'm so excited to listen to other music that's not it.
Yes. Oh man, that's a long time to work on an album, like 2 years. And there's definitely an interesting story. I was reading your little like press thing about that, which we'll dive into towards the end of the episode. But yeah, man, that's crazy. And yeah, like it's kind of funny. We've had a few artists who've come on for the second time on the podcast, and it's like I think it was 3 years ago because you were on around episode 99, episode 99 when Sam was still hosting. So it's crazy how time's flown, man. Like I
honestly, like it feels like yesterday that the coronavirus has just kind of like eaten up most of my 20s. I feel like I'm suddenly on the verge of 30 and I'm just freaking the hell out. Like I don't know what I did for the last 2 years other than this.
Yeah, it's a bit weird. Like I'm nearly 25. Well, kind of 24 and a half, but like it feels like yesterday I was 21. I was like, where did the time go? It's genuinely
ridiculous.
yeah, totally, man. But yeah, like it's interesting having like that journey. We had Tizoki on, who came on for the second time recently as well, and yeah, like a lot happens in 3 years, and I'm keen to kind of expand off the back of the previous episode, because you're definitely a producer in my mind who's known for their like quite a strong signature sound. But
I'd say that like my favorite thing is like I've heard that both as positive and negative. Like you get this quite a lot when you talk to producers, when some producers say I love your signature sound, like they mean like your writing, and then when others do it they say I think your mix is shit, and that's what they really mean. Like they use it, it's just little like backhanded compliments, like yeah it's a very unique sound. The
vibe is there. That's the other one. It's like that's another way of saying indirectly, like, the vibe is what matters, you know?
You hear that so much of just like, oh yeah, I see what you were going for. Like as this little like backhanded little thing.
I'm guilty as charged when I've given that feedback to other people. It's like,
100%.
I like the core idea here.
Well, you never want to like, especially in a feedback context, you never want someone to send you music that they poured their heart and soul into, and your first reaction is to bat it away so brutally. Just this is shit all the way down, because there's always something good about something, right? Find that totally. First, tell them what is good, and then work on the rest of it. You know, you never be one of those people who just bats it down for no reason.
Yeah, exactly, man. It's a tough balance between like, you know, providing helpful pointers forward, but also not making the other person just feel super disappointed about what they've poured their stuff into. And you know, lately I've been also like, you know, there's a balance between like objective feedback and then just like, you know, subjective things like you know, things like mix down and stuff like that. I will always be like, you know, like this is kind of like the kick should just be louder, like generally speaking. But like if it's like the lead sound, it's like, yeah, you can take that or leave that. Sometimes I might just not like the lead sound, it's like, whatever.
It's true.
Yeah.
That's kind of an interesting. That's a topic that's been at the forefront of my mind while doing the new record. Actually, this idea of like objective truth around kind of like mixing and stuff, because that it's really weird, especially with electronic music. The context for electronic music for so long has been right. It has to hit live, right? This kick has to make everybody like work on a dance floor. But like, if you're not making something for that environment, if you're just like, I just need this to be listened at home. Realistically, all the mix needs to do is complement the writing, right? So it becomes more of a musical decision than it does a technical list of things to hit. Like the amount of times I've had people going like, is this mix down technically correct? And it's like, all that matters is like, does it sell what you wrote? Realistically, like I couldn't give a shit if your mix is clipping really hard, if what you're going for is anger and like aggression and like really blowing things out. They're all musical decisions, like sometimes maybe you do want a really quiet kick because you're going for something completely different that's not supposed to make people go insane on a dance floor. It's been really fascinating because like so much of the community is built around like, no, these are objective truths we hold self-evident. Like this will always be this way. The kit will always be leveled here. We'll always run into this mastering setup or whatever. And like, no, man, they're all fun decisions you can play with. They're all good times.
Yeah, it's so true. I think that's one thing that did happen when electronic music kind of took off, like, and especially as like technology got, better and better and stuff like that, like mastering technology and limiters and just what you can do to sound now is pretty crazy. So like, these like pseudo objective things are being created. But, back in the day, there was like, it was just like what you felt, suited that track. I remember I've read a few books on mixing, and it's like, some people like, what, this flute just really needs to come out of the mix and just be the loudest element. It's like, wait, what? Like, who'd think to do that? It's meant to be like a background element, but it doesn't necessarily
it's
have
all
to.
about what you wrote. It's all about what emotion you were going for at the time. Like, it really frustrates me when people outsource their mixing. Like, I kind of understand mastering because it's a nightmare, and like when you master your own tracks, you have this existential crisis the entire time. It's horrible. But like, mixing is music making, as far as I'm concerned. It is emotional songwriting, decision making the entire time. And if you give that to someone else, it would be like not being in the editing room when you're making a film or something. Like, so much of the product and the emotion and the vibe is made there. Like, I wouldn't want to give those decisions to someone else who wasn't writing it,
Yes, I totally agree with you there. Like, mastering, I've handed off many times, and I now like do mastering. I run a label, like, so I now wear that hat for the first time recently, which is a fun kind of adventure. But I mean, you're totally right. Like, mixing, I'm like, I feel like I know people do, but I could never personally hand that off. I'm too anal about like every little decision.
100%. Like, absolutely. Like, that it's just then two creative visions who aren't speaking to one another, really. You're making something in a vacuum, giving it to somebody else, and they don't know what you were going for. They don't know what you're doing. All they'll be doing is like, they'll be referencing other tracks they think sound like you and are trying to go over there. So they're never going to create something unique or for you. They're literally going like, okay, what's the best product I can do for my client right now? It's to sound like X artist that's X amount bigger than them. It would drive me insane. Yeah,
that's fair enough. I think, sometimes like maybe sometimes having a second ear could help, but I don't know. I feel like I'd still want to make the end decision.
100%.
And I can definitely hear in your music, there's a lot of small decisions that would have had to have been made to get that music coming across the way it has. Because I mean, you're mentioning like the context. I feel like your music in general, but your new album as well, to be heard, that for me, like it is very songwriting focused, but and like, and it is like you can just listen to it, in itself. But I feel like there's a lot of energy in it too that would work in a live context. And I feel like you do balance the two contexts quite nicely. At least, personally, I think that.
Man. I appreciate that.
Maybe do you want to dive into that a little bit? Like, what does that process look like for you on the new album or in your music in general? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for saying that. That's very kind. One of the interesting things about that is like that because this whole new project was written under this like basically, I got really, really, really frustrated with modern electronic music, just because while it's been blowing up bigger and bigger and bigger, obviously we're going to bigger and bigger stages. It means that the edges are being sanded off somewhat. We're not really getting things spiking out and going in different directions. Things are aiming towards a bigger and bigger market. Not necessarily a bad thing, but it means the decision-making process is getting the same every single time someone sits down to write anything, which is really frustrating.
Yeah.
It's interesting that you mentioned the live context, because the idea with To Be Heard was, like, what if you make something that was never intended to be able to be mixed or to be danced to, right? Like the entire point is, what can electronic music do? Where can it go if it doesn't have to fit into a DJ set? If it doesn't need that macro structure?
Fair enough,
right?
yeah.
Like, which is like, I'm not ragging on the back of any DJ sets whatsoever. It's an art form all in and of itself, but it's not one that I've ever really personally connected to all that much. Like, I grew up in like in bands and live rock settings, and I absolutely adore, just like, for me, my favorite live shows are, I've gone to see an artist I love with songs that I connected to at home first, and then I've arrived, and like the emotion is seeing all these things that I adore and love like come full force right at me off the stage, and that's amazing to me. That's the most important part. But like, the process sitting down and writing it very much was just like, okay, if we're not fitting into this macro structure, like, what decision making processes does that unlock? And it turns out, like, all of them. You can do whatever the hell you want. There are then no more rules, which is genuinely quite terrifying in a weird way. Like, it's very scary. I know a lot of, for example, like what this show is kind of based on, it is a lot of, production advice and production tips. And for so long that kind of side of the industry is all about like productivity. Like, so many questions you'll get from people coming up are like, how can I finish more songs? How can I finish them faster? How can I, like, make better decisions when I'm sat at the computer? And I'm really guilty of playing into that. Like, I know last time I was on, like, me and Sam talked for ages about like how when I write an album, I'll write like 70, 80 songs start to finish, and then cut the weaker ones until I get the ones that I like.
Damn.
I think the thing that really hit home for me this time was, like, you realize if you're making 70 or 80 songs, you're really not putting that much thought into what you're doing, really. Like, it's become automatic when you're focused on efficiency, when you're focused on really like properly banging out track after track and getting more and more and more efficient. You're not making interesting decisions anymore. You're almost automating the process.
Right. Okay.
So for this one in particular, it was very much like, how do I break out of that? How do I make something interesting? And it was so frustrating. It was so difficult, because I've spent like a decade of my life getting really good at automating those processes, like taking the friction out of it,
Wow.
And all of a sudden intentionally adding that back in is really hard. Like, one of the ones that I always tell people to kind of like see where their head is at with it, for example, is like, say, for example, you've just written a verse, right? It's a really nice sounding verse. It's great. You want to go chronologically to the next bit. What would you do?
Yeah.
So
you could do a lot of things.
Yeah, you could do a lot of things, but most
reverse
people
reverse the entire intro and then just play it back and then start the song again.
Honestly, I've played with all of that kind of stuff. It's so much fun, because like, I think most people, when you've written 4,000 songs, you write a verse and your brain goes, well, it's got to be pre-chorus. And you go, why does it have to be pre-chorus? Because that's what I've always done. That's what everyone does. So that's the rule. That's what you do. But when you don't have that rule pinning you down, all of a sudden songwriting takes 50 times longer. But you always go in a more interesting direction, because you always get to the end of a section and you go, okay, what is next? Like, it doesn't have to be a chorus, doesn't have to be the build, doesn't have to be a drop. It can be anything that I want.
Yeah. That's an interesting topic, because I do think, like, the most interesting electronic music, like, just completely or music in general, really challenges those norms. I do. Yeah, it's like a balancing act between, like, knowing the rules, but then also knowing how to break them, I think. Like, I think, if like new producers who are listening to this, maybe you do need to know what the rules are a little bit more, like, to kind of, understand, kick drum, bass, sidechain, I don't know, like those kind of concepts. But then, like, yeah, like I think producers who kind of stagnate on like who are maybe a bit more advanced, yeah, I mean, I feel like I'm in that position where like, I like for example, last year I did like 52 tracks in a year, and like I'm a drum and bass producer, right? So it's like, you know, it can be very easy to like rinse and repeat the same song, like a very similar
Yeah.
song structure. But now I'm at this point where I'm like, all right, how do I like take this and kind of just like do something new? And I think you definitely do get to a point where you're like, all right, I need to like just slow down a bit, maybe.
Yeah.
Because yeah, you do have to challenge your own, as you say, habits and ways of doing things that you just automatically revert to, because we all have them, like especially the longer you
100%. We
go
all
on.
have
Yeah.
fallbacks. I mean, and that can be a great thing. Like that's part of what the quote unquote signature sound is for anybody. It's your bank of presets and decision making processes and your mix choices that you'll have made thousands and thousands of times. There's no shame in falling back to that for the micro, if that makes any sense. So like you've written a section, you need a quick lead, load in the lead that you like. Great, that's fine. It's the ideas underpinning all of those mechanics that are the things that you need to challenge and move and change. And it's quite difficult when you identify as kind of like a producer in a genre. Like I've got other projects outside of Anki that are all very focused on, this is drum and bass, this is dubstep, this is, chill or ambient or whatever. And like it's certainly a lot easier for me. I'm not having these weird existential crises. I feel a lot more detached from it because I often do feel like I am hitting the checklist,
Sure.
Like there are objective things that need to work about it. Because their environment is, to be danced to be mixed, that kind of thing. Drum and bass in particular is great because it's this great balance of the kick needs to slam, the snare needs to cut, it needs to roll really well, it needs to be danceable, but it also needs to be infused with this fucking manic energy because that's its whole vibe, right? Like there is still this really fun balancing act between the two, whereas something like house music in particular, for example, it's almost all objective truth. Like it does have to groove, but for the most part, even if you did the most basic songwriting assumptions, if you really nail the technical side of it, you'll be fine,
Yeah, totally. Yeah, and I think that's probably more so true, with like the more dance-oriented genres. But, even then I feel like, some of the most interesting producers in those spaces are the ones who are breaking the rules.
Yes,
like, I
absolutely.
I don't know if you're familiar with, like Fred again.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, like I feel like he's doing some really interesting things with the way he's like sampling in that context, and like a lot of his tunes are definitely like dance music, but like I feel like he's doing some fun things, and I feel like some producers out there, even in that world, you can do fun things in that world too. So
there's always room for evolution and growth, even within like a small. You don't have to do what I did and make something that's borderline unlistenable. Like you can very much like innovate and move around within a genre context. One of the ways I describe it to production students, they're like, whenever anyone asks for their like the signature sound talk or so, I like thinking of it as like a grid basically. So you've got like one axis is kind of intensity. So at the very bottom is like relaxed, right in the middle is kind of just like moderate, and right at the top is very, very aggressive. And then on the other axis going along, all the way over here would be as batshit insane as possible. So we're talking like no time signature, free jazz, baby, let's fucking go. All the way on the other side would be like the most commercial thing you've ever seen in your entire life, perfectly made for radio. And bang in the middle, there is this kind of like, it's taking some risks, but it still blends on the genre. Every possible genre you can think of is built around those two axes of how many risks do you take in the arrangement and where is the intensity level at? That's a really nice way of thinking about it for me. So for example, the example I always use is Joyride. Everyone loves Joyride. Joyride is just wonderful. The reason why that sticks out so well is that like in the like macro grid of house music, right, you've got like really chill deep house, so the intensity is all the way down and you're not really taking any risks. So you're over here, you get a big pocket of artists over here. Then you get like complextro, so you've got like taking some risks and really high intensity up here. Joyride is taking fewer risks, but he's ratcheting the intensity so goddamn high on every possible thing with groove and sample choice and flow that there's no one else around him in that space. So all of a sudden it becomes this new de facto genre. Everyone suddenly starts popping up around there because no one else was doing that. So you can kind of like arrive there and be like, I see on the grid where he is. All right, let's give that a go. Like there's always an interesting decision making moment to be had where you sit down and kind of plot on those grids where everyone is, and you realize, oh, no one's doing this bit over here. Okay, I'll try that. I'll try low intensity, high risk. Let's see what that is. And it can be really fun sometimes, just mapping out what's around and what's not, and seeing where the next hole will be filled, you know?
Yeah, that's a really interesting like analogy. I never thought of it like that. That's I love that, man. That's great. I'm definitely gonna use that. I'm gonna steal that from you.
Yeah, you go ahead, man. That's fine.
Yeah.
I'll come and sue you later. It's great.
Yeah. That's awesome, man. Yeah, and moving forward a little bit as well. I mean, one thing you've done on your latest album as well, is and also just in general too, is just you collaborate with a lot of people, namely a lot of vocalists. I mean, what have you learned recently, I guess, through all these collaborations? Because I know like working with others is definitely always an insightful process in one way or another. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on how that went for you.
It is. So it's I have kind of a weird relationship with kind of collaboration at the moment. So on the new records, like there's a lot of kind of features, but it's not really a kind of conventional feature list in the same way that like an Millennium record or a Said the Sky record would be, where it's basically a pop song has been written, they need a top line, they go to the hired guns of the EDM world who will write the perfect pop top line, or maybe they've got one line around. You know how the industry goes, like people get sent top lines in the bin all the time, and they just kind of like Lego bricks stick them on top of what they got until they have a product that makes sense.
Sure,
This was very much like, I had all these songs for about 2 years, and I was gonna put my own vocals on them, but I hate my voice. There's one track still with my voice on it that kind of worked, so I kept it there. But everyone else, I was like, right, I need vocalists on this one. And it very much was just, look, these songs are so weird and they're so strange and they have such an odd thing that I'm going to have to basically tell you beat for beat what I wanted and what I was thinking. It's not how I generally like to work. I don't like prescribing things. I love getting in a room with someone and just vibing and seeing what their ideas were. But this time I was very much just like, here's the subject matter. Here is the exact structure beats to hit, off you go. And they knocked it out of the park. They did really wonderful things with it.
Wow.
But like, I adore, that's not really how I tend to like collaborating, because I love learning from people's processes. So
sure.
Something that I am doing at the moment with, so Mouse, who is on the record featured as a vocalist, she is a really good friend of mine. She is a phenomenal producer in her own right. Actually, I would strongly recommend going and checking out her stuff. But we have kind of recently started a collaboration project where basically we get in a room and we kind of like yes and exclusively. That's all we do. So whatever anyone says, you have to do it. And then you have to add something to it. So we kind of just started just making the worst possible decisions, and you have to make it work, which is so much fun. Oh, it's amazing. Like, I'll turn around to be like, okay, we're going to have a new section. What BPM is this in? It should go like 250. It's like, yep, cool. Up we go. 250. Let's see what we can do. All right, what will the kick drum be? Like, where are we going to put the kick drum? On an eighth, every eighth. It's like, yep, sure, yep, put that there at 250. Why not? And it's so much fun. You learn so many things, and like your brain will go in different directions that you would never make that process by yourself. You know, a real true collaboration should be about you come up with an idea and someone takes it and runs with it in a way that your brain wouldn't have before. I think that's when you know you're onto something really, really strong and really great. The other side of collaborations, which is more of the hot industry gossip. I won't name names, but you'll probably be able to work out who I'm talking about anyway. I did some kind of collaboration work recently with like a kind of a bigger name in the kind of like future-based EDM space, which was not my kind of collaboration at all. Basically, it was that it was this thing where we sat down and they immediately they had a brief of what they wanted, and it wasn't like we want to talk about this or we want to write in this way. It was very much, here's a list of artists that we'd like to sound like, please. Can you make this?
Right.
Which is immediately not very inspiring whatsoever. So, you know, you sit down and you make it to this brief and it's a bit sterile and you send it over. And I had all these like weird little things in there that I was really happy with. They're like, oh, what about this arrangement moment? And the first thing they do is like, yeah, sorry, in our reference tracks, there's no moment where it suddenly has this weird little dubstep break. We're going to have to take that out. And like they would chop things out that didn't fit the mold, so to speak.
Right.
And all the edges got sanded away from it. So it was this kind of, it wasn't additive collaboration. It was very much subtractive. And while sometimes you do need an editor, it should always be in service of what you were writing in the first place, not what someone else has already written, if that makes sense.
Right. Okay.
So there was this, there were a few moments where I got really, really frustrated and really upset. Like I'd finished this track off, sent it off to them, and then waited, and nothing appeared for like 7 or 8 months.
Oh wow, that's a long time.
Like nothing happened. I just kind of figured, oh no, maybe it's not coming out. Then they sent me a message back like 8 months later saying, hey man, so we've decided to do some rebranding, and like based on where the industry is right now, we're going to change what we're about, and we want to aim for this style now. So could you rewrite the whole song to sound like these artists now? And it's like, oh my Christ. Like, okay,
Jeez.
yeah, sure. I guess that's what you need. So I sat down and I reworked the entire thing again to sound like someone else this time. And it did end up seeing the light of day. And I feel like when you listen to it on my Spotify or whatever, it's going to stick out like a sore thumb, because you'll be like, what, is this the same guy? And it's like, is this the same artist? Like, no, it's not at all, because it's not a collaboration of addition. It's very much a collaboration of aim at a thing and subtract until you get to it, which is not as fun. And it's not this learning process where you take on new ideas and you get someone else's input, that because the input's always aiming at something, rather than just creating and see where it ends up.
Totally. Yeah, I think it's good to collaborate with all sorts of people for that reason, because then you can see like different collaboration styles. Collaborating with someone worse than you, like like let's say like someone who's like a very new producer versus maybe you're more experienced. You're gonna learn something from that. Even then, like you can
completely. And like it's the collaborate. Even if we're going with the idea of kind of objectively worse, like the ideas underpinning them, like their ideas could still be really strong and really fascinating. They just need a seasoned hand to put pen to paper. Like there should never be a moment where you're thinking about collaborating with someone because of their numbers or their reach or whatever. Like that is not the way to do things. It should always be, you've got a cool musical brain, we get on, let's see what happens. The thing that I really did love about this record, obviously, like there are loads of different genre influences outside of kind of electronic music that's in there. The one thing that I really wanted was to get vocalists on who knew what those would be and would vibe with it. So for the most part, all the vocalists are people that I know in real life and I'm very close to. They happen to be just very talented, like great vocalists. So for example, someone like Joel, who's under the name Ashen Static, he's on a couple of these records. He is a phenomenal music producer and songwriter and vocalist in his own right. But he grew up on a lot of, emo, rock and metal and stuff. And like, he can hear something, and instead of going with a traditional like one note EDM take on it, will be like, I'm going to bring in some notes of Enter Shikari. I'm going to bring in some notes of Bring Me the Horizon. I'll take whatever I need to from outside to kind of push it in a different direction. I would always say, if you can, like, don't collaborate with someone who's making the same music as you. Like, collaborate with someone who's making something completely disparate and different, and see where those two sound worlds meet in an interesting, fun way. Like if two dubstep artists collaborate, you're going to get a dubstep track. Right? Fine. It might be a good dubstep track. It might be a boring one. You don't know. If a dubstep artist collaborates with a fucking jazz pianist, what are you going to get? You have no idea. Like that could end up really cool. What's going to happen? Like that. I think that. Yeah.
Sorry. I think one thing that just came to mind when you were saying that was the like the classic example of that would be like the Skrillex and the Doors collaboration.
Yeah.
Breaking a Sweat. Like that was really cool. And it's like such a weird concept. I feel like Skrillex is someone who's done a few interesting collaborations over the years like that. Like even within electronic music, like how he did that tune with Fortet. Like you would just not imagine those two, even within the realm of electronic music, working together. They're just from completely different opposite ends of the spectrum. But they made some really cool music, and they did like even their DJ sets I thought were like really interesting. Like just the way they did that. So yeah, it can get some really, really cool results for sure, man.
Absolutely. Yeah. I would always say, if you're thinking about, broadening your horizons, collaborating with people, go as far afield as you possibly can. See what you can do, as long as they're open-minded and willing to kind of go with it, and they're not shoehorning you into their genre. Just go fucking wild. Go and sit down and go really, really weird. Because you can get some great stuff out of that. That's where my favorite music always comes from.
And I think like reducing the expectation of even it needing to be anything like you need to release as well.
Yes.
Like sometimes you just make music for the fun of it, and
it should always be fun. Like if it's not fun, why are you doing this? It's something that really frustrates me about the commercialization of all of it. Of just like, all right, I need to make music my job because it's what I love to do, and like I'm going to be on the hustle and the grind and all of that stuff. If it is a hustle and it is a grind, you're not having fun anymore. So what are you doing here? Like music should always be about having that enjoyment and that moment and that love and passion first, you know? Like the goal of sitting down at your computer to work on some tracks shouldn't be, I have to have something to release by the end of the month. It should be, I'm really excited to make something, because when you do that, you will have something to release at the end of the month because you'll be enthused about it, you'll be passionate about it, and it'll be great.
Yeah.
And that is when music really connects with people, and it really that's when you can actually start building a sound and building a career. When you think of it as a career and a sound building thing, you're not going to have any joy, and it's going to be reflected in the music, you know? Like it won't have that infectious kind of moments that make you smile and go like, I'm sorry, what did they do? Like that comes from having a great time.
Totally. I think I'm guilty of falling into that trap myself. I'm sure a lot of people
we all
are.
We
like especially if you do rely on it for income, even if it's not like a full-time thing, like, just having like, or wanting to, and it's nice to be able to have that and monetize it somewhat. But yeah, I think comes back to like the process focus rather than the result. Like just, and what you said is like completely spot on. You actually end up like finishing stuff still, and you still end up making good music, and it's not like you sacrifice that, but it's just where your focus is at.
Completely.
Because then it is fun, and then you still get the results you were like fretting over in the first place. So,
and they're better results as well. Like it really is. Like I can't remember who it was. I was talking to someone a few months ago, and they likened that to like free range meat versus like battery caged meat. Like,
oh wow,
yeah, you still end up with like chicken on a plate, right? But one tastes significantly better.
That's interesting.
Like it kind of struck a chord with me a little bit, barbaric kind of visuals aside. Like it was, it very much kind of struck with me because like, yeah, all of my favorite music has been made when someone didn't give a shit, when someone really sat down and just went, I'm gonna go so odd and so weird, or like I have something to say and I have to get it out of my system, because it really comes across in the final product when something has been made for a brief, or when it's been made for a deadline, or because X playlist needs X amount, or we have to hit this October date or whatever. You can tell, it might be good, it might be better than good, but you probably won't be listening to it a year from now. You'll eat it up, you'll consume it once or twice, and then you'll move on.
So true. That's interesting. That's definitely some food for thought in there, man. But one thing I wanted to ask you about, like talking about like, the process and just production in general, like I would love for you to dive into like just some examples, anything that comes to mind of like, what specifically did you do on the new album? That was different, that was fun, like just a technique that you'd never tried before that resulted in something cool. Like anything that comes to mind like that, feel free to like share, because I'm sure people would love to hear.
We're going to be here all day, it'll be great. A lot of the if we're getting nerdy, we'll go real in depth to the nerdy.
We can go nerdy.
Yeah, we'll start macro, and then we'll get deeper. So like the first thing was something we've already touched on, which was the idea of like macro decision making, and just like, okay, where will this go every single time? That was a very interesting thing. But when you kind of like go a layer deeper, you can get some really interesting stuff with, okay, so when you start questioning why a verse after a chorus, or why a build and then a drop, right? You then start applying that same process to, let's say, instrumentation, right? You go, why do I have to process a guitar like a guitar? Because the rules say you should, right? Why should I have to process a dubstep bass like a dubstep bass? Do I have to play it down low? Because convention says you should. That's where it conventionally fits in the role, right?
Right.
When you take all of those out of the way, you get some really fascinating results. So one thing that I've absolutely adored doing on this record is there's guitar all over it. A lot of it sounds like convention guitar because I just love that distorted, aggressive feeling. But in every song, there are thousands of little bits and bobs that don't sound anything like a guitar, but you get a really fascinating process by plugging the guitar in and then applying your processing chain that you'd put on a disgusting dubstep bass. Or what happens if you process it like a hi-hat or like whatever, like you just throw on some very weird stuff. And then it, like, once you're plugged in, it then changes what you would play, right? Because if you processed it like you would process like a backing pad, right? And then you try and play like a chunky riff down, like, it's not going to work. It will change musically how you approach that instrument, which is really fun.
Yeah, you might play it like higher or lower depending on what you're processing.
Exactly, harder, softer. You might play chords, you might arpeggiate, you might like it interacts with the processing in a really fun way. So something I've been doing quite a lot for atmospheres recently is plugging a guitar in and basically applying loads of reverse reverb. So instead of, you know, having a transient and allowing it to go out, you play and you just get that like kind of sound, like bringing it back in when you play the guitar. That combined with some slap that back delay, it's not particularly uncommon, but it's very nice hearing that on top of electronic context. One thing that I've really loved doing is it's something I've played around with for quite a few years, but I really found a good setup for it is plug the guitar in and run it through like vocal auto tune. And then basically what you can do is you can mess with the formant shift a little bit, right? So for those producers who, you know, haven't really played around with formant is basically not the pitch of your voice, but the kind of timbre of it. So I have quite a low formant at the moment. You can go lower and still have the same pitch and it sounds like this. Or you can go higher and you have the same pitch, but it sounds like this, right? It's the same note. That's basically what formant is doing. If you formant shift something that's not a human voice, man, you get some cool stuff, right? So I absolutely adore plugging a guitar in, automating some formant shift by holding down the same note and then running that into like 9 distortion units in a row and seeing how that like really plays with some just wild stuff. You get crazy harmonics out of that. It's very cool.
Wow. That is insane. I like just I love like the thought process behind that. Like, why do you have to use a formant shifter on like, you know, just a voice? You can use it on any sound.
You can use it on any sound, man. Absolutely. Like there are so many little rules you can break, and as long as there is an element of convention and an element of structure to your song, it will still work, right? You don't have to go balls to the wall and do like Venetian snare style IDM. Like, you can make crazy, cool, interesting decisions, and then you can pin it down with a conventional beat or like a nice snare drum that's cutting through the mix. Like, so something that I really found was there are a lot of moments on this record where I wanted like just pure aggression and passion and noise and anger. So there's a lot of me just like screaming into a mic, putting genuinely like 20 distortion plugins on, like 10 OTTs, just absolutely just ramming it full, clipping everything. It's just a nightmare. As long as you can pin that kind of like insanity down with a clean kick that then side chains through and cuts through, it still sounds convincing. The audience still buys it, and you get all that passion and anger and noise coming through really, really nicely. Like the second track, Lifeless, that was a bitch to mix, but I really enjoyed doing that because like the guitars in the big section are being ran through these like overdrive settings that have been cranked far beyond anything that any guitar would possibly go through in real life. It sounds so digital and so harsh and so like brittle and angry and just like, it sounds like a human being breaking apart, which is what I wanted. It sounds great. And like it sounds, when you solo it out, awful. On top of a stack, it sounds awful. But when you like apply your traditional production techniques, when you put on your nice clean snare, you get the side chain going, like everything's bouncing and everything's working. That decision-making process feels more conventional than it actually is, right? Because it's being caught by good stuff. So like my advice to like anyone producing is go as weird as possible on the sound design stage, and then worry about fitting that in later, because there's always more ways to make something unconventional feel more palatable by adding context in the mix later, you know, right? Like you'll always find something more interesting by going completely off the reservation when you make a sound. Adding it back into the mix later, that is where you can start making it a little bit easier to consume for somebody else, you know?
Totally. That's such a good point. I think Foley is a perfect example of this. Like, Foley on its own just does not sound musical, but you put it with a beat, and the rhythm implied in Foley can become part of the rhythm of the song when it's anchored by a kick and a clap and a snare and even some other percussion, and the other musical elements. Like, yeah, that's so true. Like, the context can change how you perceive the sound.
Completely, yeah, always.
Mm.
Like the in terms of other fun kind of processing bits that I kind of discovered and really messed with this time around. I absolutely adore like there's a really lovely piano plugin called Imagiro Piano. It's the very talented young producer called Imagiro who literally just like I want to say it was for a uni project or something, just made a piano plugin for like a nice soft piano. I
Nice.
would strongly recommend everyone goes and buys it. It's like 20 quid, get it off his Twitter. It's great. But I
Wow.
use that all over this record. But something that I really love about it is that it has fantastic recordings of like the hammers coming down on a piano, the pedals being lifted up, everything like that. And there is a slider on it to jack those ambient noises up really, 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 really high. So what
Nice.
I ended up doing was I ended up jacking up that kind of like room noise, the hammers, the like the mechanics of a piano. Then I would run it into a like about a chain of like 9 OTTs and brutal limiters and compressors and all that stuff. And then what I would do was just go in and remove all the notes in the audio and just have the like clangs and punches and like weird moments where the pedals lifted off and you get these cool like moments of sounds. And I would layer
Yeah.
those up with drums and stuff because you get this
Ah.
really nice like rooted kind of human tangible layer to things that wouldn't normally be there. So
Wow.
in moments where things needed to feel more intimate and roomy, but I didn't just want to apply room reverb to an 808 or like a digital hip hop sounding kit or something, you can
Yeah.
get some great stuff by just like finding very human elements, taking all of the note value out of it and layering it up with drums. That's so much fun to do.
Wow.
Um,
Yeah.
that's a really good time. The main kind of process for this album though that I always instill, I think it's the sound of the record, is work with audio as much as humanly possible.
Right.
Like the amount of a kind of like self-imposed box you get into with MIDI is really weird. I don't know if you find this, but I feel like so
Yeah.
many people do. When you have a patch that you're working on, you have you have to put it to the DAW in MIDI. You get really precious about it. You almost don't want to go in and work on it. You don't really want to mess
Mm.
around with the lines too much or the patch too much. Like once the MIDI's down, it's almost set in stone. Like it feels like such an effort to go in and play with things. The
Yeah.
like that there's this huge barrier to it for some reason.
I
The
would
sound of
agree
this
with that.
record,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, the sound of this record for sure has been sound design something, get weird and do some stupid stuff, bounce it to audio immediately and delete the patch. And then
Mm.
you are basically forcing yourself to like go in and just force this audio to fit. And you get such fun moments because it's like the way I think of it, it's like trying to fill a container with Lego bricks or trying to fill it with water. Like it's so much easier and so much better. Like you can just chop and change it in such interesting ways. So something that I almost always do for this record is instead of playing like a full line that I know I wrote and it was perfect, I would just sound design something absolutely bizarre, like the format shifted guitar or whatever. And I would just jam for about a minute straight on any random scale, any note, just make horrible noises, experiment, bounce to audio, delete the patch, and then
Damn.
chop in and chop out of that audio in a sequence that sounds musical and fun and interesting. And then that's where some of the riffs actually come from and kind of it's the kind of thing you'd never write if you had just a line or just some MIDI, right? You really can get some fascinating stuff by going in and just mangling audio when you've been given that limitation.
Yeah, working in audio was absolutely a game changer for me in general.
Mm.
I think the reason I like it too is it's so visual, whereas
Yeah.
MIDI is not very visual. Like, sure, you can see the notes, and maybe for certain sounds which are like, purely for the musicality of them rather than maybe the sound design as much. Like that might be fine to leave them in MIDI, but yeah, apart from that, like audio, like all my drums I do in audio as well. Like I can't do MIDI drums for some reason. Maybe like hats I can do at most, but yeah, I always end up doing audio for some reason. It's just much nicer to work with. And
For sure.
are you in Ableton?
I'm not. No, so I'm quite an unconventional little duck. I'm in Reason, which is
Reason.
very odd for a lot of people. Yes.
How do you go about audio in Reason? Because that's be pretty hectic, I'd imagine.
No, audio and Reason, I think, is one of their strongest suits.
Really?
Or
Okay.
the audio processing and Reason. Like every time I collaborate with someone who works in Logic or Ableton or something, they come in and watch me work on audio, and they just go like, "That's so quick." It's like, I know, it's
Wow. Okay.
unbelievably smooth. Like
Interesting.
I get quite a lot of kind of kudos on my audio, like glitching and
Yeah.
like just messing with audio in general, just because it is so fast. Like I can chop things up, reverse things, repitch, resample. Hell, even if you double click on an audio track in Reason, it immediately brings up a fantastically convincing Melodyne-esque auto-tune system where you can go in and literally
Wow.
like just completely repitch, remangle everything with the full Melodyne like pitch like lines and everything. You can
That's
set the
awesome.
drift, set the length, everything. You can do it in seconds and get out. And you
Wow.
can apply that to any audio, not just vocals. So that again is something I've done quite a lot of like I will record a lovely piano line, or I will like I'll just have random instruments around my desk, like this weird panpipe thing. I've done that so many times where I've just like done some stupid notes and then gone into the audio and Reason, double clicked, and just done the weird Melodyne mangling and put it up 4 octaves and down 4 and see what happens when you go between them, and you get some fucking rad stuff. Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, wow. I've learned something new today because I always was like, oh yeah, Ableton's like the world's best audio, and it is good. I love Ableton,
It's
but
good.
yeah, good.
It's good, but it's more like there is nothing that any door does better than any other door at this point.
Yeah.
It's more just about what workflow clicks for you. To be honest,
Exactly.
there's very that I do not understand the kind of the door dick swinging thing. Like mine's better than yours. Like it just doesn't matter. It really doesn't. Like I know
Yeah.
people who can produce like Billboard topping hits in GarageBand. Like it doesn't
Yeah. It
matter.
happens like more than we think. Yeah.
Genuinely, like it really
Yeah.
does. It doesn't matter what you use; it's just about what you're comfortable with.
Yeah.
That's why I'm on Reason. Like I came from a very rooted like rock, metal, jazz. Like I love playing in bands. So when I wanted to teach myself production, the only one that made sense to me was one that was laid out like a guitar like effects pedal chain. I could see it, and I was
Mm.
like, oh, so this wire goes to this wire. Oh, I can
Yeah.
move that around. Great, and it felt like playing, didn't feel like work. Like I sat down, and the first thing you can do is if you just hold down alt and click on anything on the screen, automation done immediately, you're in. So I just
Yeah.
it is such a great door for experimentation, because that's where it puts all the effort to like that's what it puts in front of the user first, which is why I really like it. Like
Nice.
it's not a door for people who are more technically minded. I don't think it's a door for people who really want to get into the nuts and bolts of, all right, okay, this bus routing must be perfect. This mix down has to be exactly right. I think it's much more for a door of people who want to get in and muck about and get something fun quick.
Yeah, I think traditionally a lot of people have even just used Reason via like Rewire or something, even if
Yeah.
they use another DAW, and just the environment is so fresh. I've used Reason a little bit in the past, not extensively, but yeah, that's one thing I remembered about it. Just is the ability to just the sound mangling and processing possibilities are just endless because you can route things in crazy different ways. Like,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, that's awesome, man. Oh, well, moving on to one more thing. I wanted to ask you with your new album as well, which by the way, I love the artwork, like the basic shapes.
It's
Just classic.
my friend Oscar did that. He again is also featured on the record. He goes by Listing. He is the vocalist on track
Cool.
7. Outside, he's phenomenally talented in way more ways than I am. Yeah, the artwork is great. He smashed it.
Yeah, it's awesome, man. Um, and I guess like, yeah, I mean, we kind of touched on it earlier, but I did want to dive into it a bit more because yeah, you said obviously you wanted this record rather to be more of a songwriting, like take the conventions of electronic music and kind of throw them out the window. One thing you didn't mention earlier is that you actually pretty much had the whole album written, I believe, and then you decided like, no, this can't be the album. So I mean, I just want to know mentally, how do you have a whole album written and then decide not to release it? Like I couldn't do, like straight up, I couldn't do that. So I'd love to hear like your thoughts on that.
It was really difficult, man. So yeah, like
Yeah.
2019, I was following up my my previous album, Bloom, which like
Yeah.
it was fine, it was good, but I could feel it getting more sanded down and a bit more commercial, and I wasn't quite vibing with it in the same way. But
Sure.
I did the same process again. So I wrote, I think I wrote like 85 songs. I like from start to finish. I cut it all
Wow.
down, and I had a really good, solid album of like 14 tracks. It was getting to the end of 2019, and I had this album written, like, we had some guest vocalists on it. It was sounding really good. Everything was getting polished up. It was pretty much ready to go. And I sat down, and I just listened to it start to finish, and just like, I realized, like, I got to the end of it, and I hadn't felt anything the entire time. Like, I was being so analytical about it. I was just sat there just being like, yes, this is correct. This is right. This is good. And I had no fire in my belly about it. I had nothing that made me happy. It was so dull, and it just sounded like other people but worse. You know, it just sounded like, you know, this track sounds like Elenium, this track sounds like Porter, this track, oh, he's gone a bit weird here, this track sounds like Aphex Twin, but it still sounded like a bad Aphex Twin. And like, just because I could bound between those genres didn't mean that I was doing anything new or fun or interesting. It just felt so rote and boring, and like, I had a kind of existential breakdown about it a little bit, because I like, this is my job. Like, it doesn't pay a lot of money, and that was a bankable release that would have worked, you know, like it would have fit in playlists, like it would have had label backing, it could have been pushed, like it would have helped me out so much. But I knew personally that I would, if I released that, I kind of like did a Doctor Strange, cast my mind into the future, and I just I saw a world in which I was just bored and done with making music, you know, like I was just over it, because I wasn't having fun with it anymore. So I made the rash decision, because I knew if I kept them on my computer, I would have that panic moment of, Tom, you need to pay rent, like, God, just release this music, right, get it out. So I just deleted it all. I had a rash moment, I had a beer, and I just got rid of every shred of it. All the project files. I still have some bounces here and there just for posterity's sake, but I deleted all the projects. They are gone. And I said, we're not doing that again. You know, we are like, there's a phenomenal talk at GDC by the one and only Mick Gordon, the man who did the insane Doom soundtracks. And it's basically him talking about how he created the Doom soundtrack. And there was one bit that always sticks out to me, and it's basically saying, if you do the same process every time, you're going to get the same outcome. If you want to change the outcome, you have to change the process first, right? You have to change the input, otherwise you're not going to get a different output. So that's when I deleted everything, and I was like, I have to fundamentally rewire my brain and think about what I'm doing. I have to change the input that I'm putting into this to get something out that I'm happy with at the end of it. So yeah, that's where the kind of sea change came in. And the first thing I did was excuse me. The first thing I did was literally, I wrote about all the things that I wanted to write songs about, first of all. So I had this emotional map, and what I noticed was that, like, I had written no love songs in massive capital letters like 9 times, because I was just like, I'm so fed up of like these big, like, like, you can make electronic music about anything. Why is every single song a breakup song? Like, I mean, I know why, money, but like, I was just really bored of it. So I wrote down all the things I wanted to talk about. I wanted to, talk about suicide ideation, about depression, imposter syndrome, like all this kind of stuff. And then I wrote a big Word doc about all the things that I didn't want the album to sound like, and all of the things that I wanted to try. And the big thing on the very, very top of it was no conventional structure, and I wanted to play with time signatures as much as possible. Because like in the what this album will not be document, it was very much at the top of the list. Like, this is not to be DJ'd to. You don't like dancing, so it's not for dancing. This should be as personal to you as possible, right? So once you start realizing that, like, okay, someone doesn't have to dance to this, the first question you ask is, okay, well, why does it have to be in 4/4? Like, if you don't have to dance to it, if it is just for listening to, why do you have to have an even beat, right? So one of the first kind of doodles I did was I just sat down, put the door in 5/4, and was just like, all right, what are some fun rhythms that you can play with and mess around with? And that then was the process that started the ball rolling. Every time I would sit down at the door to make one of these new songs, I would first of all change the time signature and tempo to something you'd never normally touch, and be like, all right, what's the first thing that we can do with this? Where are the fun rhythms? Where are the beats? Where are the things that like would get people's head nodding in this mode in this place?
Sure, yeah.
And I got some really fun stuff out of it, and that's where I finally started feeling that fire in the belly come back up again that I hadn't had with the previous album. I was like, this is right. This is the thing that's working. You know, I was suddenly having a lot of fun again, and it didn't sound like anything else. You know, it suddenly was this whole unique thing because no one was aiming for it, because it's kind of a dumb idea. Like if you're making music as a job, like why the fuck would you do this? Like it's a rubbish idea. There's no mechanics for distributing it. Like I found this now that I've finished it and we're like doing a little bit of promo. It's all self-release, so it'll be a very low key kind of affair. But I'm sending it about the place, and you realize our entire system of promoting music is set up to make sure you fall into particular genre styles and bins. Like playlisting on Spotify, you have to fit this complete brief in order to even remotely think you'll get a slot on it. Yeah. And like, it's a dumb idea. That's why no one's done it before.
Sure.
But, like, I couldn't care, you know? Like if it's a horrible flop and I have to go and get a job, you know, like at McDonald's, fine. Honestly fine. Like I am so satisfied and happy to have a record that sounds genuinely like nothing else because I made some very stupid decisions. I'm just very proud of it. I'm very proud that it is completely bizarre and stupid. That's
awesome, man. No, I love that. I think, I mean, the ones who take risks are the ones, you know, despite even if it doesn't have the success like on a commercial level, like it's the ones that, you know, in the long term, as you mentioned earlier in the episode, like, you know, they're remembered by the people who appreciate them. I think like some of the songs I remember, like Longest, they have a distinctive stuff, even if people have come and gone and emulated what those people were doing to a degree and whatever, like they were, you know, people who I guess pioneered stuff in their time or whatever it was. So
that I think was a large part of the MO for this record, was very much just like, I really don't care about the numbers too much. What I really want is for someone to listen to this and to go, I can do these things, and I want them to go and do it better. Because like the person who does something first is not going to be the person who does something the best, but it shows people what they can do, what's possible, and what someone else who's much more talented than I am can go and do, and when they pick it up and run with it. Like, I would love for this to get very few plays, but for one person to hear it and be like, oh shit, like I can do that, and go and make a life-changing all-timer record off the back of it, you know?
Sure.
What I want most of all is I just want people to listen to it and be like, oh yeah, we can do other things.
Yeah.
Like I don't know if you found this recently, but like a lot of, especially the mainstream, like the big names in modern future bass and EDM and that kind of stuff, that everything is coalescing to the same point, to the point where it's borderline not electronic anymore. They're just like, there's just strong pop songs, you know? Like there's not like, and they're really well written. I'm not going to take anything away from it, but like that, I found it with a couple of the collaborations I mentioned previously. They're so ashamed of being electronic artists. I would have synths and stuff in these collaborations, and they'd be like, "Could we get rid of that, please, and replace it with a guitar? We're feeling more organic elements, please." And it's like, be proud of your medium. Like we have the opportunity to do anything we want. Like we have a computer that is capable of processing anything your imagination can conceive. Why are we regressing? Why are we going back to like just a guitar that sounds like a guitar? Why are we going back to just a pop song? And again, we know the answer, it's money, but like it's so annoying to me. Like that's really what started getting my goat. Like there is always a wonderful moment when a genre has its time in the shine and it starts blowing up. You get about 2 to 3 years where people grab the genre and just run in as many different directions as possible with it. And they go really crazy and they go, okay, what if it was that but house? What if it was that but D&B? What if it was really aggressive? What if it was really chill? And then one of those will connect with a commercial audience. That will become the new thing. And the edges get sanded down and down and down and down until it becomes this perfect pearl that you can sell, and you can sell big tickets, and it's just a strong pop track. And then people will be so bored of it that someone has to do something different, and that'll be the thing that everyone for 2 to 3 years takes and runs in different directions until something works.
It does sort of happen like that, doesn't it? Yeah,
it really does. There's always a cycle to it.
Yeah.
But yeah, it just I just got so bored. I just got so bored of these artists that I fell in love with because they were pushing boundaries, and because they were doing weird texture work and fun things with production and like utilizing interesting techie stuff to really instill emotion. All they did was boil it down to, I don't know, I guess I'll write, 10 love songs. Off we go. And it's
Yeah, I see. I see what you mean.
fine.
There's a lot more possibility out there. I do agree with you. Yeah, there's
Absolutely.
a lot more. I think that's encouraging for new artists as well who are listening to this. It's very easy to feel like everything's been done before, but there's still a lot of untapped potential. I feel like with technology out there. So yeah, we'll see. We'll see what happens. Yeah, and yeah, man, I'd be interested to hear like what's coming up beyond the album for you. Do you have any plans at the moment, or just kind of taking it as it comes, or?
Holiday, I think.
Yeah,
Honestly,
yeah.
I'm very excited to sit down and write just a few little one-offs for Anki anyway, just because like
Yeah.
as we mentioned before, my process for previous albums was, write 85 tracks and then bin all the ones until I get to it. This one was such a process and such a hard time that I literally just wrote these 10 songs. That was it. Didn't write any others.
Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
just literally for Anki, the world has been these 10 songs for 2 years. And I'm really excited to take what I learned and just like do a single here and there, just like a little pop up, and just like where else can I take this now that the pressure's off?
Sure. Yeah.
But like what I really want to do is like now that that's working, I want to start taking that sound world and applying it to things like remixes and collaborations and work with other artists and like apply their sound to this new framework. Change the time
Yeah.
signatures, change some weird stuff. That would be really fun.
Awesome. Yeah.
Other than that, like to keep myself sane while making this record, I did start quite a lot of side projects and new aliases and stuff. So I'm spinning up a few. They are much more conventional, and they're just like because I needed to get out of those songs for a little while sometimes.
Sure.
So I
Yeah.
have I have quite a relaxed one that I'm doing with Enhanced at the moment. There's like behind the scenes been working on that a little bit. Hopefully aiming to get that out either by the end of the year or early 2022, like a nice
Cool.
little 4 or 5 track, which is very chill and very nice.
Awesome.
Couple of others that I'm doing a very fun one, which I'm still getting the like full first 8 demos sorted for, but it is basically what if we did like Joyride style house music, but it's also Royal Blood? Like, what happens if it's
Right.
like everything is built off like a chunky blues guitar riff, and then it's just about dancing as hard as possible, and
Right.
like really going like full party mode. That's really fun. So
Wow.
that'll be next year at some point. And the other one that I mentioned, I'm doing lots of experimental stuff with Mouse, who's a very talented producer. We have a little alias that we're working on, which is utterly unhinged. Like if you think To Be Heard is nuts, like you haven't heard anything.
Yeah.
It's
Right.
full, like it's unhinged. It's ridiculous. Like there was one song we made which was like 2.5 minutes of 2.5 minutes 2.5 minutes 2.5 minutes of cat imitating a pigeon into the microphone, and then we were like, all right, let's just mangle that into as many things as we possibly can.
Wow.
That's very fun. So that'll be coming pretty soon once we've kind of nailed down the first 4 or 5. So yeah, lots of stuff on the horizon.
Exciting.
I just don't know what order or shape it takes yet. I feel like so many people get to come on this podcast and go like, well, I'm touring the States, you can see me here and here and here, and I'm just sat there just like, I don't know, man, I just want to make some stuff. I want to make some cool stuff.
Yeah, no, that's fair enough, man. That's cool. Excited to hear some of those other projects as well, man. And we have one last question. I'm not sure if you were asked this last time you were on. I can't actually remember. I didn't listen to this part of the episode. Well, haven't listened to it in a long time, but because I used to listen to this podcast religiously before I hosted it. But one thing I will ask, like if you had a time machine, in terms of your music journey, what would be one thing that you would go back and change?
There are a lot of things I could say that would burn a lot of bridges, so I'm not going to do that. There are a lot of things I could say that I'll get a lot of angry emails when this airs. I'll keep it more personal in that case then. I guess it would be... I would go back and I would tell myself about 6 or 7 years ago, like, don't be swayed into the commercial mold as much. there was definitely a moment where I was on the up and things were going really well, and it was because I was taking a lot of risks and going quite a bit mad. Like the first record I still really like because it does sound like a kind of adolescent brain in their bedroom going apeshit. And then the next one came out and it didn't get the response that I wanted, and I didn't like it as much, and it's because I had this burden of you need more plays, you need more numbers, you need things to go up. I just want to go back and shake myself and just say, like, stop caring about that, because people connect more with your music when you don't, you know?
Yes.
Like the moment you start putting the industry, the promo, the socials, everything before the art that you're making, the art suffers, and ironically enough, so does everything else, you know?
Right.
So I would go back and I would just say, stop it. Like, delete the socials, like log on when you need to promote a release, delete all of that. Don't focus on building a brand or any of that bullshit. And just make stuff that makes you happy and is a bit weird. Stop sanding the edges down. Because that would have saved me a good 5-year journey to get to this point, to be honest. I feel like I could have made this record about 5 years ago. I was scared and frightened. So I would go back and say, stop caring.
Sure.
I think the only other answer to that would be I would go back to my 18-year-old self and be like, learn what side chaining is. That would be the easiest one.
It's like, that's the one thing you'll never forget is sidechains. Like, I'm probably going to use that at least in some way.
Like the thing that really annoys me is, like, I think that's probably one of the first moments in someone's production journey where they sit down and they make one change and they go like, everything's 10,000% better. Oh my God. Like, it's one of the few things that you can apply and all of a sudden like, oh, this sounds way better. Like, like as a quick aside, like I got my start in production because like I wanted to teach myself how to make dubstep when I was like 17.
Yeah.
And like, it was at this moment where dubstep was just about to bubble outside of mainstream. It was before Scary Monsters had hit and had that real explosive moment. Because I was adolescent and an idiot, I was doing these things where I would like apply 9 distortions to a bass or whatever. Sounded, from a technical perspective, awful. Absolutely awful. But because it was having this moment, like, it got way more plays than it should. Like, way more plays. There was a remix that I did from back then that's on like 15 million views. Like, it was insane, and it was enough to start building this platform and this career. Like, we had like international gigs, we had like good collaborations, like really good plays, but we didn't know how to produce anything. Like, it all sounded awful. I just want to go back and be like, for fuck's sake, learn how to sidechain your snares. God damn it. Like, just like,
wow.
God's sake, high pass things, dude. Everything's got like 20 hertz bubbling up at the bottom.
All this mud. Oh, it's amazing, man. This has been a pleasure, man. Thank you so much.
It's been really fun. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, thanks for the chat, man. Some good ground covered. For those of you who are listening, for those who are listening, where can people find you online, etc.?
So you can find me at Anki Music on basically every platform. I'll give you a heads up, as alluded to previously. I don't post much because I hate social media. So it's basically as and when music comes out, you'll see my pretty face.
Totally.
At Anki Music everywhere. You can find me on all the various music platforms just under Anki. And just, please listen to the new record and share it with everybody you know, because it's really good. It's really good.
Awesome. And that will be in the description, so everybody go listen to that. But man, thank you so much. This has been awesome.
Yeah, thank you for having me, man. It's always a pleasure. Great.
Awesome.